Around the world, the diversity of bees and other pollinator populations are in free fall, with the potential of a global pollination crisis.
But how does this affect us? And is it something we need to be concerned about?
There are many pollinating insects, like butterflies, moths and hoverflies. But thanks to their industrious nature, honeybees and wild bees pollinate much of the world's food crops. Without bees as pollinators, 1/3 of our food supply could disappear.
Aside from pollinating food crops, bees are vital for pollinating wild plants. Without them, many ecosystems would collapse.
Here in Ireland, 1/3 of our bee species are threatened with extinction, and sadly, 2 species have already been lost.
With so much depending on these little creatures, I want to find out what is causing the crisis and what, if anything, we can do to save our bees.
A flower's scent has a particular appeal to a bee. Its bright colours lure her in with the promise of pollen and nectar. Without even realising it, this bumblebee is starting the pollination process. As she gathers the food from the flower, some pollen sticks to the hairs on her body. And when she lands in the next flower, some of that pollen rubs off, fertilising the plant and enabling it to develop seeds and fruit. It's incredible, really, when you think about it. Plants can't run off to find a mate. Instead, they depend on pollinators to reproduce. It's an elaborate system, whereby the plants are essentially bribing the pollinators to help them reproduce. Without the flowers, the bees would have no food. Without the bees, the flowers wouldn't be able to reproduce. This is a symbiotic relationship between bees and plants, crucial for a healthy natural environment.
Yeah, the easy apples here, the last one.
And we too benefit enormously from this relationship. Now, bees, of course, are not the only pollinators, but they are the most efficient. To learn more about the essential ecosystem services bees provide, I'm here in Cappoquin Orchards in Waterford to meet a group of scientists who are trying to work out which bee species are pollinating our crops.
Probably the most important group of pollinators are the bees, and this is because bees actually rely on nectar and pollen produced by flowers for all stages of their life cycle. So they eat them as adults, but they also then collect them and bring them back to their colonies to feed to their developing young. So even when an individual worker bee is fully full and satisfied herself, she'll still go and continue to visit flowers because she's collecting things to bring back to the colony. Flies are a little bit different. So hoverflies, for example, they eat nectar and pollen as adults, but they don't actually collect it to feed it to anything else. So when they themselves are satisfied, they'll stop feeding.
And do our Irish bees, our wild bees, do they make honey?
So it's just the honeybee that makes honey, and the honeybee is probably the most famous pollinator in the world. And the honeybee is native to Europe and to Africa, but it has been transported worldwide because of its role as producing honey, but also in terms of its role as a pollinator.
Hi, Katie.
Hey.
What are you doing here now?
So now I'm actually going to take the pollen off of these guys.
So this is the solitary bee.
Yeah, so solitary bees are a little bit different than honeybees and bumblebees. She holds a lot of her pollen on her stomach and then also some on her legs. But this little girl has been lovely and left me a nice pollen trail inside of the tube itself.
So you have enough pollen there without having to scrape it off her legs?
Yeah, because we just need a few grains to be able to tell, you know, where she's been and what she's been up to. She will probably fly away pretty soon after I let her go, but we'll just tap her out. Up and away
Goes off to get more pollen. So you do that for all of the bees that you've collected up today?
Yeah, so that we can kind of see for each of the different groups what kinds of pollen they're collecting.
And then you'll know exactly where they've been foraging and what kind of crops they're pollinating.
Exactly.
Or wildflowers.
Or exactly. And we can see kind of what's important to them. Like, even though there's a lot of apple blossoms around, do they prefer something else? And it's all just good information for us to know.
Okay.
I asked Dara about the difference between wild bees and honeybees in terms of pollination.
Honeybees are obviously very good pollinators, but in some ways it would be concerning to put all of your eggs in one basket and to, rely solely on one bee, because there have been lots of issues with honeybees in terms of diseases and things like that. So having wild bees pollinating, first of all, is providing an insurance policy, a backup, resilience in the system. But also what's kind of interesting is that honeybees are only able to pollinate certain flowers. So there's plenty of flowers that have evolved with other pollinators. Things such as tomatoes or blueberries, for example, the flower needs to be buzzed at a specific frequency to actually release the pollen. And honeybees can't do this very well, whereas bumblebees can do this very well.
The flower needs to be buzzed at a particular frequency.
Yeah. So it's a plant's adaptation to ensure that its pollen isn't being wasted. The pollen's only going to the correct pollinator.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is called buzz pollination.
And what other Irish crops would be pollinated or benefit from pollination?
A really big one will be clover, white clover, which is obviously a forage crop that's then fed to animals, so that would be a big one. Oilseed rape, apples, as we're looking at here. Also things such as peas, beans, strawberries, raspberries, blackcurrants. About 75% of all of our crops globally benefit from insect pollination.
75%, so 3/4 of our global food crops.
Yeah, so that amounts to about 30% of the food that we eat, and a lot of it are kind of essential nutrients. So, for example, 70% of our vitamin C comes from insect pollinated crops. These crops tend to be fruit crops, nut crops, seed crops, even some oil crops, things like coffee, chocolate. Lots of the kind of important things in life come from insect pollinated crops.
So coffee and chocolate we have to thank the bees for, really,
Yes, yeah.
or other pollinators.
Yeah.
Clearly, then, pollinators are really crucial as part of our food production systems for us. I suppose then there's the other element of the importance of bees and pollinators in wild ecosystems.
About nearly 90% of our wild flowering plants require pollination by insects in some degree to reproduce. So our landscapes and our clean green image and everything is also very tied to insect pollination.
That was an amazing day, wasn't
With
it?
such a vital role in the pollination of crops and wildflowers, it's alarming that a 2006 Red List reported that more than half of Ireland's bee species have suffered substantial declines in population, and a third are threatened with extinction. In 2011, the National Biodiversity Data Centre launched the Bumblebee monitoring scheme to provide an early warning signal on how our more common species are faring.
Now, how many yellow bands are on that middle section where the legs and the wings insert? Two. Now let's look at its face.
I'm here in County Roscommon to join a citizen scientist training day hosted by Castlecoot Tidy Towns and the National Biodiversity Data Centre to find out more about the monitoring programme.
The Bumblebee Monitoring Scheme is a citizen science-driven scheme to measure how our bumblebee populations are changing across the year and then across years. We engage a whole network of volunteers to undertake the surveying for us, analyse the data and then report back what we find. This one, again, ginger job, but look at that abdomen. It's uniformly blonde. I know there's black underneath there, but that's the cuticle you're seeing underneath the hairs. That's the large carder. That's the one we're really quite concerned about. This is the one that's declined by 23% now over the last 6 years. Near threatened in Ireland, vulnerable across Europe. Again, it's one we really want to know more about.
With such a diversity of pollinators, I'm curious to know why bumblebees get so much of the attention.
We need some metric of how are bees doing, and that's very challenging to do when you have 99 species to monitor. For the vast majority of bees, they're just difficult to identify, difficult to find, except for the bumblebees. So we can't measure them all, but we really can measure the bumblebees. And areas that are rich in bumblebees are also typically very rich in all the other bee species too. So they're an excellent indicator of how all bees are doing in any one locality.
And what is it that appeals to you about doing this kind of survey work?
Well, I suppose the whole biodiversity thing is so important, and the fact that they're in decline is very significant as well. It'd be great to see if you could help out around the county.
Catching them and seeing them up close is very cool.
Yeah. So have you learned
Really
a lot
makes
today?
A difference. Oh, yeah.
Do you think you'll go out and become citizen scientists now?
Totally.
So you'll be feeding data into the national survey scheme?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Donata, do you think you have a favourite bee?
The buff-tail one.
And why is that your favourite?
The queen ones look so cool.
The queens were really big, weren't they?
Yeah.
And do you think you'll go out now and do a regular survey of one of the transects?
Definitely, yeah. We plan to do it. We have our section picked out.
So you now are officially citizen scientists.
Yay.
Well done. And that scheme has been running for a few years already. Is there anything that you've learned by the citizen science contributions already?
We have. So we now have 6 years of field data. So what we have found that over those 6 years that the annual rate of decline is in around 3.7%, and that ultimately equates to around a 14% loss over 6 years of our bumblebees.
That's quite alarming. I mean, if that's going to show to be true, 14% decline in only 6 years, if that trend continues. Goodness.
Although it's early days for the Bumblebee monitoring scheme, the overall trend is clear. A year-on-year decline of our bee species. That's a staggering prospect, as we're only beginning to grasp the consequences. In part 2, I'll explore the causes behind these declines and find out what we might do to reverse them. Native Irish bee numbers are in serious decline, raising fears that many species are being driven to the brink of extinction. Recently released data for 2017 show that bee populations have fallen to their lowest levels since monitoring began. To find out why, I've come to Wicklow to meet bee expert Professor Jane Stout.
Hello, Jane.
Hi, Anja.
How are you?
Good, thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you for coming to
No
meet
problem.
me. Jane, we know that there have been massive declines in bee populations in recent decades. What is causing this?
The declines are thought to have been driven by a combination of factors. So it's the fact that there's not enough habitat. So we've lost flowering hedgerows, little patches of woodland, things like this meadow that's full of a huge diversity of different plants that provides food right through the seasons for the insects. A lot of our bees nest in the ground, so they need undisturbed ground where they can nest and complete their life cycle. The more intensively we use our land, the less of those kind of places there are. But also bees are being affected by things like pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and insecticides of course kill bees because they are after all insects. You go into the supermarket, buy a bug spray for your roses or something in your garden. It doesn't just kill the ones that you want to get rid of, it can kill all the useful ones, including bees and other insects as well. And also diseases, things that are coming in with managed bees, new diseases, parasites. Along with changing climates, more extreme weather events, all of these things together are affecting bees and causing their decline.
And what can we do about that in terms of the way that we farm, the way that we manage our parks and gardens, the way that we use pesticides? How can we improve the situation for bees?
Well, we can improve the situation by, once we understand what's causing the decline, then we can start to reverse that. Providing food, providing safe places to nest, reducing pesticide use, particularly outside of food production systems. We don't want to go to that situation where we don't have the bees, we don't have the birds, we don't have the flowers in our countryside. It would be a very sad day. I mean, beyond providing crops, providing food, beyond providing food for other wildlife, these are amazing and interesting and fascinating creatures that if you get close to them, have a really good look at them, they're incredible. So, why would you want to lose them?
Across Ireland, People are beginning to wake up to the wonder of pollinators, like the Tidy Towns group of Geishel in County Offaly. They've come together to implement an ambitious 5-year plan to stem the decline of pollinators and other wildlife in their town.
Welcome to Geishel.
Thank you very much.
Lovely to meet you.
You too. Are you going to show me around Geishel?
I will indeed.
Brilliant, thank you. This is very picturesque.
Isn't it? Place is lovely. Thank you.
And when you started, when you made the decision to make the town more pollinator friendly, how did you go about it? How did you know what to do?
There's no doubt, but we had very little knowledge at the beginning of the process. And there was nothing else for it but try and get experts in who could help us.
Oh, this is a lovely little archway, and there's a...
Isn't it? This is one of our apartment blocks.
Fantastic.
We've planted over 400 trees, and all of them would be pollinator friendly. 98% of them, I would say, are native trees. And we've also planted, I think, something in the region of 350 metres of hedgerow, native mixed hedgerow. This is the heavy lifting, and it was after that we began to look at our flowers.
As well as planting native trees, they've changed the flowering plants that they use to make the town look nice. They plant bee-friendly perennials instead of annual bedding plants.
Hello, Karen.
Hi, how are you?
Good, I'm Anja.
Hi, Anja, lovely to meet you. How are you?
Very busy here, lots going on.
Very busy, lots going on, but Anja, no one comes here just to watch, so if you want to grab a couple of pots, you might do some planting.
Fantastic. Okay, great.
Great, come on down this way.
And what you've been planting here, how have people responded to that? Because it's quite different to the normal, very colourful.
Absolutely, but it's been really, really good. I think we've been doing a lot of education of people as we go along, and we've been trying to explain to people through social media and in person. Like, you'll see people are putting out their own little window boxes or their own flower beds, and they'll have a couple of flowers that they might have seen that we've planted here, such as the antirrhinums or the snapdragons down the end, because they know they're good for the bees. So it's nice to see that people around the village are kind of getting involved and just thinking a little bit more when they're putting out flowers to understand that they need to have some food for the bees as well, so it's great.
And what about sprays? Have you used any sprays to keep everything tidy?
No, we stopped using herbicides a number of years ago. Obviously, any kind of herbicides, like, they kill our bees and our other pollinating insects. And we take a very sensible approach, you know. We're not going to keep everything 100% weed-free, but it's not about that. We'll very often, if there's a weed that grows and it has a beautiful flower on it, we'll leave it there for a couple of weeks because that's food for the bees.
Not using the herbicides and changing your planting regime, has that put you at any kind of a disadvantage for the tidy towns?
Tidy towns are so much more now than tidiness and very pretty flowers. They are very much themselves focused on pollinator and pollinator-friendly planting and on ecology and wildlife. So no, it's been fantastic.
Really lovely. These are very pretty.
Students at the local national school are also taking steps to provide habitat for wild bees.
When did you plant up these?
We planted them a few months ago because bees love the apple blossoms on the trees for the nectar and pollen.
And then there'll be apples too, I suppose?
Yeah.
What kind of garden is this, girls?
A sensory garden and pollinators.
And pollinators as well? Yeah. To attract bees. And what attracts the bees here?
The flowers and
the pollen. Hi, girls.
Hi.
What are you doing here?
Sticking up some bees and butterflies to show the village how important bees and butterflies are to the pollination.
We're going to have a look at it from the outside. You lead the way.
The community here have shown that they don't have to compromise on beauty to make their village more bee-friendly.
I think people forget that insects, pollinators, insectivores need habitat, and that is provide food and provide shelter.
Okay. But it fills the heart.
Yes,
really lovely.
And again, it saves on mowing.
Yeah.
You just leave it until September, then you cut it to the ground, and in spring, hopefully, you will have new growth coming back up again.
I'm truly inspired by the community here in Geishel and the actions that they're taking to address the declines of pollinators in their area. But almost 2/3 of Irish land is farmed, and with an ongoing programme of intensification of agriculture, dramatic changes in how we manage the land are taking place. This is causing enormous losses of Irish biodiversity, and there are significant implications for our pollinators.
Hi lads, where are we going to go today? Farm walk and a nature walk, okay?
In an effort to lessen the damage to nature, a pilot programme is underway in the Bride Valley in County Cork.
And we got our first pollinator.
It's headed up by dairy farmer Donald Sheehan.
And what is the Bride project then?
The Bride project is biodiversity regeneration in a dairying environment, BRIDE. The Bride is the river. It's a tributary of the Blackwater.
And it's about specifically trying to get the farmers in the Bride catchment to meet the challenges of biodiversity loss.
Absolutely.
In this area.
Yeah, it's targeted advice for all of the farmers. We have an ecologist, Tony Nagel. He goes out and he maps each farm for habitats and draws up a plan accordingly then.
That's an emperor, and it's the female because the female is green and the male is blue. Look at his wings, he's different again, lads.
This is quite a wide hedge margin and there's loads of flowers in it. Have you done something special to this?
Well, this was reseeded 2 years ago, and what we did was planted a 2-metre margin of wildflowers. That's not normally done, but we just wanted to do something specifically for pollinators. And there's a number of species of wildflowers in there specifically for pollinators.
Like what?
So you have great mullein, you have wild carrot, you have oxeye daisy, you have spear thistle, which is not liked by farmers because it's considered a weed, and that's really the line of defence. If you bring that out, you're giving more to biodiversity. If you push it in, you're giving less, and it's all a matter of where do you draw the line. Yeah. And you know, it's the crux that farmers are in always, because the land is their income, and unfortunately. There's no income to be got from biodiversity. I get paid for producing as much fat and as much protein kilos as possible, and the emphasis is on production. So you're focused on, maximising the production from the farm. And as I said, unfortunately, there's no financial value in having these wide field margins or high hedges, and that's why they get taken out.
There's a value, though, to wider society of having these, isn't there? How do we rebalance that?
Yeah, and that's the delivery of what they call the delivery of public goods. Farmers shouldn't be asked to provide these services without being incentivised to do them.
But there already are payments coming from the public purse, from the taxpayer, to farmers to produce in a way that's less destructive environmentally, or to do positive things.
We've had several environmental schemes now at this stage. We've had REPS, we've had EOS, we've had GLAS most recently, but we're still losing biodiversity.
Even though we've been doing all of these schemes, they haven't been focused at a farm level, they haven't been targeted at improving biodiversity.
Absolutely not. The thing with the Bride project is it targets each farm, and it targets it specifically for improvements in environmental sustainability, and that's how we pay our farmers then.
Well, I really hope that works, because that's a pilot kind of approach for the whole country to follow, isn't it?
It is. Well, it's a pilot. It was never done before on intensive farmland, and that's where a lot of the biodiversity is being lost because of the intensification. And we are saying that you don't have to reduce your food production capacity, but you can make huge improvements in biodiversity.
We now know that wild bees are under serious threat in Ireland. But thanks to the National Biodiversity Data Centre, we have an all-Ireland pollinator plan that sets out exactly what we can do to halt the decline. To succeed, it needs everybody to get involved. Gardeners, farmers, community groups and county councils. It's up to us. We can choose to save our wild bees.